So what we're going to see in a little while is how to set up your questionnaire and how to manage a CATI study. And that breaks down into some parts, and that's what I'm going to take you through in a minute. I'm not going to go into huge depth here because I don't want this webinar to run for 2 hours. It's not a training session. There are very good videos actually on our website that can explain how you set up a questionnaire and prepare it in very good detail on our website. And if you want links to those, we can obviously supply those. So a survey in QPSMR gets broken down into these bits. So the first bit that you often prepare is any questions that you're pulling through from the sample file. Now that can be anything from nothing to lots of data. So to take those extremes and explain that, you could have a sample file that just has a list of telephone numbers and you're actually pulling no other data through about your respondents to your survey data. You might more commonly have some basic information about your respondents or prospective respondents. So you'll have their telephone number, obviously, and you might have perhaps their some demographic details about their age, gender, region, or something like that. And you could pull those through into the survey and use them if you wish as filters. Or you could go to right up to the extreme there and you could pull through a lot of data from a previous survey. So what I'm thinking of here is where you perhaps do a pre and post test, where you could do a pre-test, store that data and keep that data with the sample data file so that you can do a post test and you could pull through data from the pre-test as part of the post-test survey, so that then you could really do some quite complex routing in your questionnaire. So at the post stage, you might know, let's keep it simple, you might know that someone was very dissatisfied with the service, but at the post stage, they were just quite satisfied. So you could actually then filter a question which said, for those people who were previously dissatisfied but were now satisfied, you could ask a question because you could pull through from the sample file the pre-test data that you'd collected. So when I say prepare sample questions, that can be anything from nothing to 1 or 2 demographics right through to a whole survey's data that you're pulling through and using perhaps to corroborate data or to use as filters in your survey. Then we're going to prepare the main questionnaire, or look at preparing the main questionnaire. So these are the questions that you would ask in the course of a normal questionnaire, just typical market research questions and rating scales and so on. And then we're going to put that together, the sample questions and the main questionnaire, with what I've called the control, which is the control that is actually going to manage your CATI interview. And that'll become a little bit more apparent in a minute. And what that will prepare for us is a final questionnaire. So they're the sort of 3 steps we're going to go through. Having produced our final questionnaire, we're going to look at preparing the sample data and then preparing the files for the survey and looking at how we can manage the CATI study overall. All right, so I'm going to come out of PowerPoint now and I'm going to move to a presentation of QPS. And we're first of all going to look at putting in some very simple questions. And just to show you what I've got ready for this particular survey, let's go down here. What we're going to work with in this particular demonstration is that I've got a sample file here which has got some people that we want to interview. So I'm just going to open that up in Excel. It's a CSV file, and this is going to be the people that we're ultimately going to interview. So I've got a fairly small sample here, I'd admit. I think it's just 30 people in this, yes, 30 people in this file, and we have to call the telephone number field telnum, and you'll see I've got some fields here called serial, name, address 123, postcode, telnum, member and event. So this is some data about my respondents, 1 meaning that they're a member of an organization, 2 meaning they're not a member, and a 1 in the event here meaning they attended an event, and 2 meaning they didn't attend an event. So we've got some information about our respondents here. We've got their name over here and we've got their telephone number. That telephone number field must be called telnum, and that's the only mandatory field in this particular file. So we need to tell QPS about these fields that we're going to pull through, the members and events. What do they mean? So I'm going to start a new project here. And I'm going to go into the system to put in the first question, and I'm going to copy the name of that field that you saw just now, member, and I can choose what type of question it is. Well, it's a single response question, and I'm going to choose it as a piece of data that I'm taking from the sample file, and I might want to use it in my quotas later. So if I do, I could check it there, and I can type in, the text for that question, whether member of organization, and I can insert the responses as yes and no. And so that is my first field, which I'm taking off the sample file. So remember, I'm first of all specifying the fields I want to take off the sample file. And the other field that I have here is event. So I'm going to put that information in now, insert an entry. Again, it should match the name of the field. It's single, did or whether attended event, and the responses for that are also yes and no. And I just forgot there to click that as a sample point. I'll make that part of the quota that I want. So that set up the two fields that have come through from my data file. Just going to save this. All right, and now we can put in some questions that might relate to our survey. So I might start with a question here, which is question 1. And you can see now that I've got a range of different types of questions that I can ask. They can be single, they can be multi, they can be numbers with or without a decimal point. They're curiously called weights, but then just numbers with or without a decimal point. I can collect character data. I can have an instruction for an interviewer. I can collect verbatim data so that information, so the text that, or the information that a respondent gives on the phone is sent straight to a CSV file that can be coded later on and merged with your survey data if you wish to. But here I'm going to just select single, and I'm going to say, do you own a bicycle? And when we look down here, you can see I've got a whole stack of options that I can use. I could choose to randomize the responses for this question. Well, that wouldn't be appropriate here because the answer is going to be yes and no. If I had responses I wanted to pull through from a different question, I could do that. Again, I don't want to do that. So, for example, if you were asking people which brands they were spontaneously aware of, you might want to either blank out the ones they've selected for the prompted awareness, or you might want to have them already checked so that they didn't have to ask them again. So things like pre-selecting and auto-select responses are available. But in here, I could input my choices as yes and no again. And just in case you're wondering about the number of responses here, you can have up to 10,000. And you can see I've got a whole set of options here for each response. So if I wanted anybody who said no, not to continue, I could suspend input and that would close the questionnaire. So anybody who said no to question 1 would automatically get rejected from the survey. So click OK again and OK, and we've saved that question. And I can carry on in this way, setting up these questions. I could just quickly do another question. Make of bicycle owned. So this particular question, we're going to have different makes of bicycle. And just type in a few brands here. And just to show one or two of the features as I go along here, none of the single response only are present. So it's going to it's going to keep none of these as single response only if present. And I might keep it at the bottom so it's not randomized, so that when I randomize the responses, none of these stays at the bottom. Now, I'm not going to go through all the features that you've got in setting up your questionnaire. You've got all the features that you need, I can assure you. There's plenty of videos that will take you through that in detail. And if you've got any concerns, you can obviously write to us and we'll explain how everything's handled in QPS. But basically, all the tools you need are there for randomized responses, carrying responses through, carrying text through from previous questions, and indeed filtering as well. So I could filter this question here so that the only people who answered it were people who said yes at question 1. And I'll give it a name, FQ1, and apply it. And now this question is only asked of people who said yes at question 1. So you get a feel for how you set up a questionnaire. I've not shown you even a fraction of the tools you've got in there. You can randomize blocks of questions and so on. So all the tools you need there for managing a complex market research questionnaire are there. If you want to test your survey to see what it looks like, you can go into one of the test modes. At this stage, you might as well just test the paper input because it hasn't even thought about it being a CATI survey yet. So I can just test this. And you can see I'm going through the answers here. If I type 1 to question 1, it gives me the answers at question 2 and lets me choose multiple brands, but I can't choose multiple brands in none of these. So it all looks as though it's working. Although if I choose no here, you'll see that it's grayed out and skipped question 2. So that routing seems to be working. But basically, I go through the process of building a questionnaire which has the questions on my from my sample file and the main questions that form the body of my survey. So now we're going to look at how we put that together, and I've got something prepared already for this, of course. So I've got here what I call a skeleton QDF. So let me open that and explain what this is. Let's just open that. So this is a skeleton CATI QDF, and as you'll see, it's full of entries that begin with Z, mainly with ZZZ, not totally, but mainly with ZZZ. And what these entries are, these are the entries that control the CATI interview. So these are going to do things like, for example, time sections of your questionnaire. They're going to know when to call someone back if an appointment's made. So if someone starts an interview and after 5 questions says, actually, I'd like you to call me back tomorrow at 7 o'clock, these are the controls. They're going to store that information so that the system knows to make a call back to that particular respondent at 7 o'clock tomorrow. And in this file here, you'll find all of the controls that you can have. You don't need to use all of these. You can delete some of these. For example, here you'll see the information about the 9th callback is stored in these fields here. So this is the data relating to the 9th callback if somebody happens to make 9 callbacks. If you didn't want 9 callbacks and just wanted only 5 callbacks, you could just delete those fields by just going project delete, and they would only be called back up to 5 times. So you can see it's counting down 9 to 0. So this is storing the dates and times and the user who initiated each callback, starting with call 0, which is the initial call to an interviewer, up to 9 callbacks. And you can have more than that if you want more than that. I personally think that 9 is probably too many anyway. And in here, these controls are storing things like the appointment date, the appointment time, any comments you want to leave people. So perhaps if an interviewer started an interview and found a particular respondent to be difficult or in some way, or had some particular need, perhaps was hard of hearing or something like that, a comment could be stored here so that when the next interviewer the next day completes the survey or calls back, they're already aware of anything relating to this particular respondent. Last question number asked is stored here. So if we're calling back, the survey obviously then restarts at the appropriate question. So if a respondent gets up to question 6 one day, continues the interview the next day, it would just automatically restart at question 7. So all these ZZZ fields are storing information about the state of a survey, an individual survey, or controlling the actual survey as a whole. And so this is all handled by an administrator who would manage all this sort of thing. And you can see here, like, the length of the interview is also recorded. And if we scroll down a bit further, you'll see that the sections here where we enter questions that we want. So here, if I just expand that slightly, you can read that. So any entries here from the sample file go between these two fields. So this is where we put those two fields, member and event. And further down here, we've got TTT main and TT main end. In between these fields, we will put the questions which form the body of our questionnaire. And then finally, at the end here, we've got all the outcomes that can come from a survey. You can edit these to have more, but effectively they boil down into completed interviews, partial interviews, interviews where there's a failure for some reason. So that might be where somebody refused, it might be where the number's just not obtainable, it might be any number of reasons. Or a fourth one, of course, is where you're going to recontact because perhaps the number was engaged, no one answered, or an appointment was arranged. So these outcomes, you can edit these outcomes, but effectively they boil down to those different types of completed, partially completed, failed, and to try again later, effectively, or retries. And these outcomes here also contain messages. You can see here, for example, if the ending was one of these, you could say, thank you for your help. Unfortunately, some of your answers fall outside of the survey requirements, where if it was a successful interview, the interviewer would read out, that concludes the interview, thank you for your time, goodbye. So all those sorts of things can be controlled in here. Now what we do is that we paste into these sections the sample questions and the main parts of the questionnaire. So if I go to the full questionnaire, which was prepared here, so let's open that up. So you can see now that what we've got is all the fields prepared from the sample file. You may recall we had name, address 1, address 2, postcode, address 3, postcode, member and event, and then we've got 13 questions and some filters that relate to the body of our questionnaire. So what I would do, I would paste those into the sample part of the skeleton questionnaire and paste these into the main part of the questionnaire. And if I jump into this file here, you'll see that that's actually been done. So here's our skeleton questionnaire, and now you can see in here that I've pasted or already prepared are the questions from the sample file. The names must match the names, the headings in that sample file. And down here we've got the questions that form the body of the questionnaire put in that part. And so this particular file now, with that skeleton questionnaire added together with the sample file questions, added together with the body of the questionnaire or the main questions on the questionnaire, forms the questionnaire file, the QDF as it's called, question definition file, that you use to manage your whole survey. So this is everything together, which means we don't need the parts that formed it. We just need the full CATI questionnaire. Now I'm ready to move on as a supervisor or administrator to actually putting this survey together so that interviewers can work on it. And that's just a case of following 3 or 4 steps, which perhaps look complicated the first time you see it, but actually are very, very easy. They're just the same steps that you follow each time. And the way we do this is that we make a data file. So I'm going to open the data window. It knows that I'm Phil. And I'm going to make a file called, I'm going to call it Project X, and I'm going to call it Sample. And it tells me I haven't got this file yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load my sample file into this folder here by updating it from that file we looked at earlier called people.csv. So let's open up people.csv. It's picked it up as a portable format, and I want to make a new questionnaire for each of those records in the CSV file. So what's happening here is that effectively QPS is converting that CSV file that had our sample into an ASCII file that's going to be used in our survey. And what you can think of being on that ASCII file, well, in fact, that's what's actually on that ASCII file, is just the data we have at the moment, which in this case will be their name, address, telephone number, whether they attended the event and whether they were members. All of the other fields are going to be empty. So it's waiting effectively to put in or superimpose all of the data that you're going to collect in the process of, or an interviewer is going to collect in the process of the survey. And what's going to happen with that data in terms of records in the data file is that the administrator here is setting this up. And then when an interviewer requests a record from the sample file, they're going to take that record and add to it the data that they collect as part of the survey. And that might just be an instruction to call back at a later time, or it might be the real survey data itself and an outcome, meaning that it was successful. In which case it will go to the completed record if it's successful, to the partial file if it's partially completed, or if it's a failed record because the number doesn't exist or something like that, it will go to the failed file and not be recontacted. Or if it's a retry because the number was engaged or didn't answer, it will go to the retry file to be attempted later. So I'm going to make that file there. And I've got some OKs here to check it's brought in everything correctly, that I've named all my fields correctly. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to close down this now and close my data entry. Now I could go into a test mode again like I did just now and test my questionnaire to make sure all my routing works correctly, and that's what one would do in the normal course of events so that you can run tests on this. But we're going to hope this is okay, and we're going to go on now to prepare this so that an interviewer can work on this project. So I'm going to now act as an interviewer, sorry, a supervisor, I apologize, and I'm going to go into the Quota Control. I'm going to create a quota file for this particular project. So this is Project X quota file. Okay, and now I'm going to edit those quotas. And you can see the questions that have been set up for quotas are the member, non-member, attended event, not attended event. And let's say that for members, I want to get 30 respondents. I want 10 non-members, and I want 20 people who attended the event and 20 who didn't attend the event. So they're my quotas, and we'll see these fill up, of course, as the survey progresses. So as supervisor, I've set up my quotas. I'm now ready to issue this project to the interviewer. So I'm going to now distribute it. It's a telephone survey. I'm going to issue serial numbers. My sample file is Project X sample. I've got quotas in Project X quota.csv, and I'm going to output my full data to Project X main, and I'm going to store the paths, and I'm going to make this project X CATI survey. So that's prepared the files now so that they're ready for interviewing. And now my interviewers can work on that. So I'm going to switch roles now. So interviewers would work on this file here, and you'd only give them access to this. Of course, you wouldn't let them have it. You'll probably put this in an area that they can reach, but they can't reach these parts. You don't want your interviewers changing the questionnaire. So if I was an interviewer now, I would be told to log into this, and it would confirm who I am, and I'm ready to start conducting telephone interviewing. And if I'm told to from the members only, you can see I've only got 16 records available, and when I'm ready I can get one from the sample. I've got this one here. If I've got an automatic dialer, it will automatically dial for you. I haven't got it on my computer, so I'm going to click the interview button, and I can now proceed with the interview. And if I'm willing to, I can confirm this information and answer the questions using my mouse here. Obviously, I'd ask these questions and collect the data. And hopefully we'll get to the end of this soon. Okay, so I've got to the end of the interview. It tells me it was a successful interview, and I could read it out to the respondent. That concludes the interview. Thank you for your time. Goodbye, which I remember reading just now. And we have completed that particular interview, and we can save it. And we're now ready to do another one. And let's say things don't go quite so well this time. Let's say this particular respondent, we start the interview, and after 2 questions, they say they're too busy today. So at this point here, they get to question 4, and they say that, can we actually do this tomorrow? I can hit one of the F11 key, and I can either terminate it or I can continue it later. And if that respondent says, well, I'd like to actually do the survey at 7 o'clock tomorrow, and I don't mind any time within 30 minutes of that, maybe I can type 30 in there, and I can set high or low priority. I can say that only I contact that person, or someone else can do it, or anybody can do it. So I've got a whole set of tools here I can use for controlling when that person's called back and who contacts them, and indeed the supervisor can control that. And that will end that interview, and it'll just say, thank you for your help so far. As agreed, we'll call again tomorrow at 1900. So that completes that interview, and that interview then would appear tomorrow automatically as part of somebody's work when it's the appropriate time. So that gives you a quick introduction to how an interviewer works and how you can carry out an interview and set appointments for other projects. You could also, with this system, customize exactly what reporting you get. So as a administrator or a supervisor, you can decide exactly what reporting is produced. So I think I've got a project open here. Here we go. So this particular project is pretty much the same project. We have actually carried out 10 interviews on this one rather than just the 1 or 2. So I can open some tables that have been prepared here, and I could customize these to be what I like. So this particular report is not particularly interesting, but it tells me that I've conducted 10 interviews on this survey. 4 were members, 6 were non-members, and my average interview length was 64 seconds, and the longest interview took 146 seconds, and the shortest took 10 seconds. And basically, in analysis here, I can use any of the fields on my data, so the length of the interview, who conducted the interview, what answers were given to key questions, whether people who answered different sections of the questionnaire took longer than others, any of the data that's in the full survey or as part of the control for the survey, how many callbacks they took on average, all that sort of data. I can set up tables like this so that I can get a very complete analysis of the progress of my project. And as a supervisor, I can go into my quota control and I can see at any one time how things are going. So I can look in here. I think actually I used the wrong quota file just now. So let me just go back here and view the quota file. Yes, I did. I picked the wrong quota file. So for this project, we can see that there's 30 members on the file. 2 have been saved so far, so it needs 28 more. And the non-attendees, we want 20. We've got 2 already, so we need 18 more. We could have more fields in here, of course, but this one's only got 2 quotas it's trying to satisfy. These could be age, gender, age within gender, whatever you like. And indeed, the supervisor could change these quotas at any one time and could feed interviewers or all the interviewers particular quotas that you're running not so well on. So if you're finding that you're struggling to get non-members, for example, you might set your interviewers up so that they only interview non-members to boost a quota that's flagging or is behind schedule. So I'm going to stop there. I've given you an insight into what QPS looks like, how it positions itself in the QPS market, where QPS positions itself, what things you have to do to prepare your questionnaire. That was all very quick. It was all done in about half an hour, the actual presentation of the software. There's obviously a lot more to it. There's a lot more videos and a lot more tools that you can avail yourself of to be able to build a full questionnaire and a full survey.